All right, guys, let's get right to it and start talking about how elections in the United States works. I'm gonna go a little bit fast, so forgive me. Feel free to pause, go back, do whatever you need to. Let's look at Mr. T. Did you ever want to run for president of the United States? Maybe that was Mr. T, who literally was looking at you in like the supermarket and was like, "Hey, do you want to be president of the United States?" And you were like, "No." And then he said, "I pity the fool," or something like that. Or maybe it was some other position in government. Well, that's what we're talking about today. And that's ultimately why we join political parties. When you have millions of people on your side, it makes it much easier to try to win political positions when you have millions of voters who will vote for you instead of you just being kind of by yourself. Positions like President of the United States would be virtually impossible to win without the usage of political parties today. Obviously, Washington didn't have one, but that's George Washington. None of us are George Washington. How to vote 101, though. Are you a citizen of the United States of America? Do you meet your state's residency requirements? Are you 18 years old? Are you registered to vote? If you answered yes to all those things, you indeed can vote, and Mr. T will not pity you. Those who cannot vote, non-citizens, which is pretty obvious. I mean, do you want people in Europe and China and Russia to vote in our elections? No. People with felony convictions, although some states do allow it. Some people who are mentally incapacitated, you got to be able to check the box. People under 18 years old. Those are the people Mr. T pities. When do we vote, Mr. Shoens? Well, we have an election every 2 years, even if it's not necessarily a presidential election, because every 2 years there's some really important positions up for grabs, i.e., all the House of Representatives positions. And according to the U.S. Constitution, the first Tuesday after November 1st will always be Election Day, meaning that this year's Election Day is November 3rd. Now, I always get the question, why on earth did the Founding Fathers make it where it's the first Tuesday after the first Monday? Like, why so specific? Well, they did that so that way Election Day would never interfere with church attendance. Because back in the day, it was not easy to get to your polling booth. So, in other words, you'd go to church on Sunday, you'd travel on Monday, you voted on Tuesday. Says a lot about how much our founding fathers valued religion back at the origins of our country to put it in the Constitution like that. Side note, this is your year, this is your time to shine, guys. Vote this year. I won't get more into that, just vote. Anywho, where do we vote? Well, in the United States, we have designated polling places that you must go to in order to vote on that Tuesday. Basically, it depends on which precinct you live in. Precincts are just basically how we cut up the map when it comes to voting, and you go to certain polling stations within that precinct. So when you go to one of these places, you'll present your driver's license to prove that you live in that precinct, and then you will vote. So I can't, like, if I'm in Michigan at the time, I can't just like go into any precinct in Michigan and be like, hey, can I vote? I'm over 18, I'm registered, blah, blah, blah. No, you got to vote where you live, in your precinct. That being said, I always get the question, especially from the seniors, can I vote online? No. Obviously, there would be some huge, huge cyber hacking concerns if we were able to vote online. There's only really two options when it comes to voting. You either go to your precinct's polling station and you wait in line and you vote, or you fill out an absentee ballot. Because not everybody is available on this first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, especially people like soldiers, for instance, who might be stationed overseas. You can fill out an absentee ballot and you can send it in early, and that will count towards your vote. And I will caution you though, because a lot of my seniors usually say, I'll just do that instead of waiting in line. You can do that instead of waiting in line, but the reality is those are counted last, those absentee ballots, as well as sometimes they just don't count them at all. If most major races are already called, then even if you voted for stuff like amendments and stuff, they might just not bother. Do I have to vote with my party though? During a general election, no. You can vote for whoever you want during general elections, but during a primary, you must. I'll explain more in a bit. Anywho, how to get nominated to become President of the United States 101. Are you interested in being President of the United States? I can already hear like Nick Racine and like Lindsey Graham literally like saying yes, 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 and they're literally like fighting each other to death to get the nod for it. And I'm sure more people in your class are also interested in it, but we'll move on. If so, Are you aware of how you go from being a senior in a classroom to being on that podium where people are donating millions of dollars in order to see you potentially get one position? Well, let's investigate how that is done. Step 1, party nomination. When you have a big group of people in a political party, like the Republicans, like the Democrats, what they have to do at the beginning is nominate someone who is a worthy person to fill that vacancy in a public office. However, more than one person might be nominated. This can happen on the local, state, national levels, you name it. Um, but what happens if more than one person is nominated? Just like as if Oprah Winfrey was going into like a political party and was like, and you get a nomination, and you get a nomination, and everybody gets a nomination, just like how she used to give out cars. Many people can be considered good to run for a candidate position within a political party. How do they figure out who to choose? Well, that's where the remaining steps go in. Should be noted before we continue, does that mean I can't run for a position if I don't have a political party? No, you can run as nonpartisan, although it might not be wise considering there's a lot of Republicans and Democrats out there, although in some cases it might be wise considering depending on where you live. Anywho, step 2, hold a primary election. Now, the whole point of the primary election is for the political parties to narrow down candidates for the big major offices. So a primary election will happen near the beginning of the year. The dates are subjective. It all just depends your state. Some are sooner than others, such as Iowa always goes first. And then some states do it all on the same day. That's why you might have heard stuff like Super Tuesday. But at the end of the day, all you are doing is if you are like a Republican or a Democrat, you are voting amongst a list of Republicans or Democrats who should get the nod for that position. I'll use the 2020 Democrat nominees as an example. At the beginning of the whole campaigning cycle for the Democrats, they had a lot of nominees. And then after debate, after states started voting and all that different stuff, they slowly were getting taken away till eventually you had one candidate left, Joe Biden. And then Joe Biden gets the nod for the Democrats at that point. It should be noted during these presidential primaries, each state votes on who they think should be representing. And during these elections, you can only vote with your political party. It would not be good for Republicans to sabotage Democrats by literally voting for a lesser candidate during the primaries for Democrats. That would be not cool. Same vice versa if Democrats did that for Republicans. All these primaries are simply for the political parties to decide who's going to be the candidate. Basically, you're narrowing it down. If you're a Democrat, you're voting between Democrat candidates. If you're a Republican, you're voting between Republican candidates. Now, step 3, that's when the general election starts. Once the political parties have figured out who's going to be the person running for that office, they have a big celebration, they bring the balloons, they got the confetti, they got the big TV screen, all that different stuff. That's when the whole campaigning for that person starts. They could have campaigned obviously prior because they're all campaigning prior, but that's when it's like, okay, we're all on board with this candidate for better or worse. Now, when it comes to presidential campaigns, after that party has nominated one candidate to run, that's when the campaign trail will start. These campaign trails do take a long time. I'll use Hillary Clinton's as an example just because that one is a great example of it being concluded, as in campaigning is not done with the current 2020 election. Hers lasted in 2016, 597 days long from when she officially said, I'm running for president, all the way till she eventually lost. In other words, is that more than a year? Yes, people do this way in advance, even before they're officially nominated by their political party. The nominees will go around the country and they'll give speeches, they'll do rallies, all that different stuff, basically trying to get people on board and voting for them. But the candidates will spend more time in swing states. Swing states are states that have a similar level of support between the two major political parties. You have some years they go red, some years they go blue. Blue being Democrats, red being Republicans. I'm mentioning this because you guys ultimately live in one. Florida can swing either way depending on the election. I know that map shows mostly red, but think of where the cities are at. During those campaigns, you'll see debates from both sides. In the last presidential election, you saw 3 major debates between President Trump and the presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. It's hosted by different venues, different news agencies, different moderators, all that different stuff. And then when you get to that Tuesday where we're actually voting, that's where you vote, and there's two different votes that are counted. You have the popular vote, which is the actual number of votes a candidate receives. And then you have the electoral vote, which is the amount of electoral votes that the candidate receives. Our Constitution states that the popular vote really means nothing, and the electoral votes is the thing that matters. You need 270 electoral votes to ultimately win the election. But that does always lead to a controversy, especially when even in the last election where you clearly see here that President Trump has won the electoral vote, but not the popular vote. Here's my brief discussion when it comes to the Electoral College. Normally I spend a day on this, but we're spending like 4 minutes, so there you go. The Electoral College is a body of people who represent the states and the voters of the states, and they formally cast the vote on the state's behalf for the election of president and vice president. Here's a map for you guys to kind of get an idea of just how many electoral votes are in each state. So you have states like California that have 55, you have states like Texas that have 38, Florida 29. I would expect most of these to change once we have the data from this year's census, by the way, so I wouldn't like memorize any of these, unless you want to just get a general idea. But isn't the Electoral College a broken system? A lot of people have argued that. I mean, Hillary Clinton said that if she was ever to run for president again, she would advocate the abolition of the Electoral College, just because the popular vote doesn't mean squat. Shouldn't the person, though, who receives the most votes end up with the position? Why is it that even if a candidate wins by the popular vote, they don't win because of an electoral vote? Why is it that states, even if the state has one vote more, why does that candidate get all the votes for electoral votes? Well, first of all, the Electoral College is not broken. It's actually functioning as intended, as in this is what our founding fathers wanted. They realized that the small states still needed to matter. They wanted to make sure that states with huge populations couldn't just bully the other states when it comes to presidential elections. Because if you were looking at that map and you were looking at all those numbers, if you realistically went with a population map of the US and you got all the votes in California, Texas, Florida, Ohio, New York, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Georgia, you would have over half of the population in the US, meaning 41 states' votes would essentially not matter. That's why they made the Electoral College. So that way the small states would still matter. It goes way back all the way to those Virginia plans and New Jersey plans and the Connecticut compromises. That being said, I know a huge criticism that I always get my 12th graders. They always ask, well, why don't some states just split the votes then? Like, because right now, as it states, if a candidate wins just one more vote than the other, they get all the electoral votes in some states. Reality is the states decide that. And reality is no states wants to do that because otherwise they'd be useless when it comes to the elections. Florida is a big campaign state because it's worth 29 electoral votes. If it split those electoral votes, then it essentially would be netting 1 or 2 electoral votes depending candidates. Like if it was the last election, President Trump got 29 electoral votes for winning Florida. If they split it, it would have been 15 for Donald Trump and 14 for Hillary Clinton. Effectively, only 1 vote would have gone to Donald Trump at that point. So no state's going to do that. Some do, but they're states with really low electoral votes in the Northeast. Now, that being said, what if no one gets to that magic number of 270? Well, if no one receives a majority of electoral votes, then it'll fall into the House of Representatives to elect the president. They'll simply cast a vote, and the one who has the most votes wins. That's happened once with the 6th president, John Quincy Adams. Basically, no one got a majority vote in the Electoral College, and then it went into the House of Representatives, and then Henry Clay did a corrupt bargain, and then John Quincy Adams became president of the United States, and Andrew Jackson was not happy at all. Anywho, how much does this whole process cost? I would show you like more positions, how much each one costs, but just to kind of give you a short summary, I think it's interesting that the average cost to win just a Senate seat is around $42 million out of your bank account. So if you're thinking about running for those positions, there's a reason why a lot of those guys need to take money. Anywho, that's it when it comes to elections. Make sure you guys do the worksheet and enjoy your weekend.